My little cousin sat at my shoes and sneered. Uncle says you're nothing but a fake. I looked down at the glob of saliva sliding off the edge of my leather loafer. Thorne was 10 years old. He had my father's wide, aggressive jaw and a haircut that cost more than my first car. We were standing on the patchy grass of my aunt's backyard, the air thick with the smell of burning charcoal and cheap citronella candles. Across the yard, my dad Sterling was holding court on the patio. He was gesturing wildly with a half-empty beer bottle, wearing a tailored linen shirt that I knew for a fact had been purchased on a credit card, maxed out in my dead mother's name. 4 of my uncles were leaning in, nodding like he was handing out winning lottery numbers. My dad fancied himself a visionary life coach. For as long as I could remember, he spent his years renting out sad hotel conference rooms near the interstate, the kind with patterned carpet that smelled like stale smoke and desperation. He delivered seminars to vulnerable, exhausted people, calling himself an elite motivational speaker. His brand was Alpha Destiny. His entire strategy relied on using our family's pain as raw material for his overcoming adversity lectures. Every mistake I made growing up as his only daughter was repackaged, polished, and sold as a cautionary tale for his audience. I didn't say anything to Soren. I just wiped my shoe on the grass, turned around, and walked out of the family barbecue. I didn't speak to Sterling again for 18 months. I was too busy surviving. I had built a B2B logistics software platform from the ground up. It took 4 years of sleeping under my desk, eating cold canned soup, and dodging collection calls to get it off the ground. My partner Finn was my anchor through all of it. He was patient, steady, and came from a world so far removed from my chaotic upbringing that it sometimes felt like we spoke different languages. The ultimate betrayal happened on a Tuesday night in October at my regional business award banquet. My startup was finally taking off. We had just closed our first major funding round. The banquet was held in a glass-walled hall at the city botanical gardens. The room was filled with his wealthy parents, major investors, and industry leaders I had spent 2 years trying to get in the room. The tables were covered in white linen, silver, and low-lit floral centerpieces. It felt like I had finally crossed an invisible finish line. Then Sterling arrived. He wasn't on the guest list. He pushed his way up the hostess, wearing a cobalt blue suit that was entirely too loud for the room, aggressively networking before he even reached my table. He was handing out heavy, gold-embossed business cards to venture capitalists who were trying to eat their filet mignon. Halfway through the evening, the MC was supposed to introduce me. Instead, Sterling hijacked the microphone. He tapped the mic, the feedback echoing sharply across the glass walls. He claimed he wanted to toast my success. He raised a glass of champagne he had snatched off a passing tray. But instead of a toast, he launched into a dramatic, rehearsed retelling of my darkest chapter. My teenage stint in a juvenile facility for shoplifting. He didn't just mention it. He turned it into a theatrical performance of his own brilliant parenting. When she was 15, she was broken. Sterling zoomed into the microphone, pacing the small stage. A thief, a lost cause. The system wanted to throw her away. He left out the part where it was February. The gas had been shut off because he spent his utility money on a multi-level marketing buy-in, and the item I shoplifted was a $40 winter coat so I wouldn't freeze on my walk to school. He described me in handcuffs. He mimicked my courtroom tears, pitching his voice high and mocking. He exaggerated my criminal record to make himself look like a savior, claiming he spent his life savings on lawyers to keep me out of prison. I had to break her down to build her back up, he told the crowd, his voice dropping into a practiced, rousing whisper. I applied the Alpha Destiny principles to my own home, and look at her now. 200 elite guests sat in horrifying silence. I couldn't breathe. The room felt incredibly hot. I looked over at Finn's mother, Eleanor. She was gripping the stem of her wine glass so hard her knuckles were white, looking like she might faint. Across the table, Holt Fairfax, the lead investor who had just committed a massive seed round to my company, slowly put his drink down. He didn't look at me. He just looked at the table. Sterling finished by saying my success was entirely due to his strict alpha discipline. He dropped the microphone, grinning like he had just won an Oscar. Investors pulled their funding the next day. Holt's assistant sent a brief 2-line email citing a shift in portfolio alignment. It was a polite way of saying they didn't hand over million-dollar checks to people whose fathers aired criminal records at galas. It took aggressive, humiliating damage control to save my company. I spent weeks taking meetings, eating dirt, opening my personal life to forensic audits just to prove I wasn't a liability. When I finally called Sterling and screamed at him, he didn't apologize. He claimed I was being ungrateful for his marketing genius. I gave you a backstory, kid, he said over the phone, chewing loudly on something. People love a redemption arc. You're welcome. 3 months later, the dust had barely settled. We had scraped together just enough bridge funding to survive, and I was preparing for my company's massive national launch event. It was our last shot to prove the platform worked at scale. Sterling assumed he was the keynote speaker. He started texting me daily, asking for the guest list to promote his coaching packages. I ignored him. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, I found out through my event coordinator, Paige, exactly what he was up to. Paige walked into my office, closed the door, and silently slid a glossy, heavy stock brochure across my desk. I opened it. There was a full-page portrait of Sterling, wearing that same cobalt suit. Underneath his name, in bold, aggressive font, it read, co-founder and chief visionary officer. He had secretly printed hundreds of them. He was planning to flood my launch event, selling $10,000 coaching packages off the back of my software's success. I picked up my phone and called him. You aren't speaking at the launch, I said, my voice dead flat. You aren't coming to the launch. If you show up, security will physically remove you. He laughed, a slow, condescending chuckle. You can't silence the man who built you. I'll see you Tuesday. He hung up. That's when I decided Sterling needed a taste of of his own extreme accountability. The week before the launch, I had Paige compile a list. I pulled the names of all his high-paying coaching clients, his mastermind buddies, and the men who paid him thousands of dollars to learn how to be alphas. I invited them all to what I billed as an exclusive, high-level leadership retreat. I told them I was hosting it in Sterling's honor, a masterclass in transparency and corporate synergy. I rented a boardroom in a high-end downtown hotel. It had heavy oak doors, leather chairs, and a massive projector screen. Sterling showed up 30 minutes early. He brought a dozen men who hung on to his every word. They were the kind of guys who wore too much cologne and checked their luxury watches every 5 minutes. Sterling sat at the head of the table, beaming, a fresh notebook open in front of him. I stood at the front of the room. I didn't have a microphone this time. I didn't need one. Gentlemen, I said, looking around the table. Today we are doing a deep dive into absolute transparency, the core of true leadership. Sterling nodded sagely, tapping his expensive pen against his chin. I hit the button on the remote. The projector clicked loudly, throwing a massive PDF onto the screen behind me. Let's start with financial fortitude, I said. I projected his actual financial history. I started with the 3 separate Chapter 7 bankruptcies he had hidden from his followers, dating back to 2012, 2018, and 2021. The documents were black and white, undeniable, bearing his legal signature. The room went dead quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear the air conditioning hum. Sterling stopped tapping his pen. Ren, he said, his voice carrying a warning edge. What is this? I didn't stop. I clicked to the next slide. Next, he looked at capital acquisition. I showed them the civil court documents, proving he had embezzled $35,000 from his own brother's hardware store. My uncle Declan, to fund his very first seminar. I showed the settlement agreement, where Declan had agreed not to press criminal charges, as long as Sterling stayed away from his family. Ren, that's enough, Sterling barked, half rising from his chair. I clicked again. I detailed how the imported luxury car he took selfies with every morning was a short-term lease he was 3 months late on. I projected the desperate emails he had sent to the dealership. I showed the ledger, proving he had drained my mother's life insurance policy to pay off underground gambling debts. I pulled up the HR termination letter from his only actual corporate job, detailing how he was fired for aggressively harassing a 19-year-old receptionist. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I spoke in the exact same even, professional tone I used to pitch software. Finally, I clicked to a photo of a rundown gas station off Route 90. And this, I said, looking directly at the 12 men at the table, is where he left me overnight when I was 12 years old, because a repo man caught up to him at the pump, and he panicked, left the keys in the ignition, and ran into the woods. His disciples stared at him in utter disgust. Sterling's face was entirely drained of color. The deep tan he meticulously maintained looked gray and sickly. He stood up, trying to project his booming stage voice, forcing a manic smile. Gentlemen, he stammered, his hands shaking violently against the oak table. This is a test. He's testing your loyalty to the Alpha framework. This is a manufactured crisis simulation. A man named Caspian, the top-tier client Sterling had been courting for a $50,000 platinum package, stood up. He didn't say a word. He just picked up his leather briefcase, walked out of the boardroom, and let the heavy door click shut behind him. The spell broke. Within 2 minutes, the entire room emptied. The men didn't even look at Sterling as they filed out. They just walked away, leaving just the 2 of us. Sterling looked at me. The bravado was entirely gone. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine, unmasked terror in his eyes. He leaned heavily on the table, his breath rattling in his chest. You destroyed my livelihood, he whispered. No, I said, packing my laptop into my bag. I just told your story. I walked out without another word. Finn's parents were initially terrified by the fallout. Eleanor had caught wind of what happened at the hotel and immediately suggested we delay the national launch. She sat in my living room, twisting her wedding ring, saying my family was simply too toxic for the current market climate. She worried the scandal would bleed onto Finn's reputation. I refused. I had spent my entire life paying for Sterling's messes. I wasn't going to let him cost me a single day of my launch. 2 days later, Sterling showed up at my office complex. He didn't make it past the lobby. Security called me down. When I stepped out of the elevator, I barely recognized him. He wasn't wearing his tailored suit. He was in wrinkled slacks and a faded polo shirt, looking a decade older. The aggressive posture was gone. He was stooped, frantic. He admitted the state tax board was auditing him. Without the income from the clients I had just run off, he couldn't cover the minimum payments on a massive backlog of penalties. Worse, Caspian and 2 other clients were banding together to sue him for fraud, using the documents I had displayed as evidence that his entire business model was a deceptive practice. He begged me for a loan, right there in the lobby, in front of the front desk staff and a delivery driver. He was sobbing, wiping his nose with the back of his hand, saying he was going to lose his house, that he might face real jail time for wire fraud if the client pushed the issue. I sat across from the man who had monetized my misery, on a sleek lobby chair, feeling nothing but a cold, heavy finality. I told him I would not give him a single cent, not $1, but I told him I would pay for a financial mediator to help him restructure his bankruptcy, on one strict condition. He was never to use my name, my business, or my past in his mouth ever again. If he ever printed my name on a brochure, if he ever mentioned me in a seminar, the mediator would pull out, and I would hand over every document I had directly to the state tax board. He nodded frantically, agreeing to everything, his hand shaking as he thanked me. I turned and walked back to the elevator, feeling a strange, hollow weight lift off my chest. I thought I had excised the infection. I thought it was over. The next morning, I walked into my office to finalize the launch sequence. Finn was already there. He was sitting on the leather sofa in the corner, staring at the floor. Paige was standing by the window, chewing furiously on her thumbnail, a stack of folders clutched to her chest. And sitting at my conference table was a man in a gray suit I didn't recognize. Ren, Finn said quietly. He didn't get up. He just looked exhausted. The man at the table stood up and offered a brief humorless nod. Miss Novak, I'm Cormac Aldrich. I'm the Regional Compliance Director for Vanguard Trust. Vanguard was the bank that held all of my company's primary operating accounts. It was where the remaining investor funds were parked. What's going on? I asked, looking looking from Finn to Paige. Paige wouldn't meet my eyes. Cormac Aldrich opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of paperwork. He laid it flat on the glass table. 3 weeks ago, an auxiliary line of credit was opened in the name of your company. $250,000. My stomach dropped so fast, I felt dizzy. We didn't authorize a line of credit. We just closed a seed round. The paperwork was filed with your corporate EIN, listing you as the primary guarantor, Cormac said, tapping a manicured finger against the top page, and listing a Mr. Sterling Novak as the co-founder and authorized signatory. I stared at the paperwork. The room started to tilt. Sterling hadn't just printed brochures. He had used them. Along with copies of my early incorporation documents he must have stolen from my apartment months ago, to walk into a branch office and leverage my company's new valuation. The funds were fully dispersed 20 days ago, Cormac continued, his voice devoid of any emotion, to a series of offshore accounts that our fraud department has since flagged as associated with unregulated sports betting. That's not possible, I managed to say, my voice sounding incredibly small. My signature has to be on that. Cormac slid the last page across the table. It was my signature. Or rather, a flawless forgery of it. Sterling had spent 30 years watching me write, watching me sign homework, checks, and leases. He had practiced it until it was perfect. The first payment on the credit line defaulted yesterday, Cormac said, which triggered an automatic review. When our underwriters saw the nature of the outbound transfers, they froze the account. All accounts. I looked up at him. Your operating capital is currently frozen pending an internal investigation into corporate fraud, Cormac said. Unless, of course, the company intends to honor the debt and bring the line of credit current immediately. I looked at Finn. The national launch was in 4 days. We had vendor payments, server hosting fees, and payroll dropping on Friday. If the accounts were frozen, the launch would collapse. We would breach contract with our early adopters. The software would go dark, and the remaining investors would sue us into oblivion. If we contest this, Finn said quietly from the sofa, we have to file a formal police report. We have to claim identity theft and corporate fraud against your father. And if we do that, I asked Cormac, the investigation takes anywhere from 60 to 90 days. Cormac replied smoothly, during which time, the accounts remain frozen. Furthermore, a criminal investigation of that magnitude involving the alleged co-founder of the company becomes a matter of public record. I felt the air leave my lungs. If I paid the debt, if I somehow found $250,000 we didn't have, Sterling got away with it, but the company survived. If I fought it, I would have to send my own father to federal prison. The PR scandal alone would guarantee Holt Fairfax, and the rest of the board would dissolve the company before the weekend. Sterling hadn't just stolen from me. He had built a trap where the only way to save myself was to protect him. I looked at Cormac. He was already packing his briefcase. He didn't care about the launch, or my father, or the 4 years I spent sleeping under a desk to build this software. To him, I was just a compromised asset on a Tuesday morning spreadsheet. How long do I have? I asked. To make a decision? Cormac snapped the brass locks on his leather case. The freeze is automatic. But if you intend to bring the account current and avoid a formal fraud declaration, the wire needs to clear by 4 p.m. tomorrow. Otherwise, our mandatory reporting protocols trigger, and the file goes to federal authorities. He handed me a business card. I didn't take it. I just let him set it on the glass table next to the forged documents. Have a good afternoon, Ms. Novak. When the heavy conference room door clicked shut behind him, the room felt completely devoid of oxygen. Paige was the first to speak. Her voice was thin, bordering on tears. Ren, the caterers for Tuesday tried to run the deposit this morning. It declined. They left a voicemail while you were talking to him. It was already happening. The bleed. Finn finally stood up from the sofa. He walked over, picked up the forgery, and studied it in the harsh fluorescent light. It's flawless. If I didn't know you were with me the day this was supposedly signed, I would swear you wrote it. He's been practicing it since I was a kid, I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone else. He used to forge my signature on report cards. Then on apartment leases when his credit tanked. $250,000, Finn said, dropping the paper back onto the glass. We don't have it. We burned the last in the runway on the venue and the marketing push. We're tapped until the new subscribers go live next week. I know what our balances are, Finn. We have to go to the police, Paige whispered. She was 24, fresh out of grad school. She still believed there was a right way to do things. It's a crime. He stole from us. If we go to the police, the accounts stay frozen, I said, looking out the window at the gray city skyline. The launch dies. Holt Fairfax will sue us for breach of fiduciary duty, and we will spend the next 5 years in litigation. Sterling knows that. He counted on it. Finn ran a hand through his hair, pacing the length of the room. I can ask my parents. I turned to look at him. He hated asking them for anything. That was the whole reason we worked so well together in the beginning. He wanted to build something outside of his family's massive shadow, and I just wanted to build something, period. Your mother told us to delay the launch because my family was too toxic, I reminded him. If you go to her now and tell her my father just embezzled $250,000 from the company, she will demand we liquidate. She won't, Finn said, but she couldn't meet my eyes. We can frame it as a short-term cash flow issue, a bridge loan. We pay them back the second the subscriber for revenue hits. You can't lie to Eleanor. She'll demand to see the ledger. She'll see the freeze. Then I'll tell her the truth. Finn shot back, his voice rising in panic. What other choice do we have, Ren? You have $250,000 under your mattress. Because I don't. He was right. Finn called his mother from the hallway. 10 minutes later, he came back in, looking sick to his stomach. She said we can come over. Now. I told Paige to go home, to stall the caterers, to tell them it was a routing error that would be fixed by tomorrow. She grabbed her bag and left, looking like she was fleeing a burning building. We took Finn's car. It was a silent, suffocating 40-minute drive out to the suburbs. Eleanor lived in a sprawling, slate-roofed estate in a gated community, where the lawns looked like golf courses, and the driveways were paved with imported stone. The house always smelled like fresh lilies and expensive beeswax polish. It was the kind of wealth that didn't need to shout because it owned the people who did. She was waiting for us in the sunroom. She was wearing a beige cashmere cardigan, sipping tea from a delicate porcelain cup. She didn't offer us anything to drink. Sit, she said, gesturing to the pale sofa across from her. Finn sat. I remained standing. Finn tells me there has been an irregularity with the operating accounts, Eleanor said. She placed her cup on the saucer with the soft lid, and that you require a substantial bridge loan. It's temporary, Finn jumped in, his tone entirely too eager. Just until Tuesday. The launch will easily cover. I wasn't asking you, Finn. Eleanor interrupted immediately, her eyes locked on me. I want to hear it from Ren. Tell me exactly what happened. I looked at this woman who had always viewed me as a stray dog her son dragged home. I swallowed the bile in my throat. My father forged my signature and took out a line of credit, I said. He drained $250,000 into offshore accounts. Vanguard caught it and froze our assets. Eleanor didn't blink. She didn't gasp. She just let the silence stretch out, savoring the absolute power of the moment. I see, she finally said. And rather than report the felony, you wish to cover it up with my money. To protect him. To protect the company, I corrected sharply. If we report him, the funds stay frozen for 3 months. The company dies. The company, she repeated, tasting the word on her tongue. She picked up her tea again. It seems your family is entirely incapable of leaving a room without breaking something in it. Mom, Finn warned. Don't interrupt me, Eleanor said, her voice dropping into a register of pure ice. She looked back at me. I will write you the check today. It will clear Vanguard by tomorrow morning. I felt a brief, desperate surge of relief, but it died before it could reach my chest. Under one condition, Eleanor continued. She reached into the drawer of the side table and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She must have had her lawyers drafted the second Finn called. You are clearly compromised. Your background is a liability. Your family is a liability. I will not pour $250,000 into a sinking ship with you at the helm. She slid the paper across the polished oak table. You will step down as CEO, Eleanor said. Finn will assume majority control of the company and all voting rights. You will remain on staff as a technical consultant. If you agree, the wire transfer happens in 10 minutes. If you refuse, I suggest you call a good criminal defense attorney for your father. I stared at the document. It was a standard transfer of equity and title. I looked at Finn. He was staring at the floor. He wasn't surprised. He knew what she was going to ask for. He had known before we even got in the car. You knew, I said. The words tasted like ash. Finn finally looked up. His eyes were red, pleading. Ren, it's the only way to save the platform. We built this together. I won't freak you out, I promise. But my mother needs the security, or she won't release the funds. It's my company, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I built the code. I slept under the desk. And your father is the reason it's burning down, Eleanor pointed out. This is business, Ren. Take the emotion out of it. You brought this risk to my son's doorstep. It is only fair that he holds the keys until the fire is out. I looked at Finn, waiting for him to fight me, waiting for him to stand up, grab my hand, and tell his mother to go to hell. He just sat there, looking defeated. Just sign it, Ren. We can fix it later. We just need to survive until Tuesday. This is how they do it, I realized. Sterling used loud, aggressive theft. Eleanor used quiet, polite extortion. It was the exact same violence, just dressed in nicer clothes. I didn't have a choice. Not really. If I walked away, the company died, the investors sued me, and I was left with absolutely nothing. I had spent my entire adult life trying to outrun my father's destruction, only to be backed into a corner by the people I thought were my sanctuary. I picked up the heavy, gold-plated pen from the table. The metal felt cold in my hand. I leaned over and signed my real name on the line, legally handing over the only thing I had ever built that actually belonged to me. Eleanor smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. She picked up the paper and placed a quick call to her banker. The wire was initiated before I even put the pen down. I'll take an Uber back to the office, I told Finn. Ren, come on, I'll drive you. Don't, I said. I walked out of the sunroom, through the massive foyer, and out the front door. The air outside was humid and thick. I ordered a car and stood at the end of the long driveway, watching the impeccable landscaping blur in my peripheral vision. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from an unknown number. Check your email. We need to talk about Caspian. I frowned. Caspian was the high-tier client who had walked out of the boardroom after I exposed Sterling, the one leading the fraud lawsuit against my father. I opened my email app. Sitting at the top of my inbox was a message from an address I didn't recognize. There was no text in the body of the email, just a single audio file attached. I tapped it. The audio was staticky, clearly recorded on a phone tucked into a pocket or a bag. There was the distinct clinking of silverware and low restaurant chatter in the background. Then I heard a voice I recognized instantly. It was my father. You pull the Vanguard maneuver, Sterling's recorded voice said, sounding surprisingly calm, not frantic like he had been in the lobby. You force the freeze. It corners her. Then the Fairfax kid steps in with his mother's money to save the day and they push her out. Another voice responded. Deeper, slower. It was Holt Fairfax, my lead investor. And your compensation for orchestrating this exit? Holt asked. 10% of the company once Finn assumes full control, Sterling replied easily. Plus, you make the tax board issue disappear. I stood frozen on the imported stone of Eleanor's driveway. Sterling hadn't just stolen from me. He had sold me to my own board of directors. The black sedan I ordered pulled up to the curb, its tires crunching softly over Eleanor's imported gravel. I opened the door and slid into the back seat. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror and asked if the AC was okay. I didn't answer. I just stared at the back of his headrest, pressed the phone to my ear, and hit replay on the audio file. Then the Fairfax kid steps in with his mother's money to save the day, and they push her out. The Fairfax kid. Finn Fairfax. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window and closed my eyes. It all snapped into focus with a sickening, violent clarity. Holt Fairfax wasn't just a venture capitalist who happened to like our pitch. He was Finn's uncle, Eleanor's brother-in-law. I had spent 2 years thinking I was pitching my heart out to win over a skeptical board, when in reality, I had just walked into a family dinner. Finn had wanted the company, but he didn't want to look like the bad guy. He liked playing the supportive partner, the grounding force to my chaotic background. So they orchestrated illustrated it. Holt played the demanding investor. Eleanor played the cold but necessary savior. And Sterling? Sterling was the easiest mark in the world. They knew exactly who my father was. They just handed him enough rope to hang me with. I opened the email app again. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were perfectly still. I hit reply to the blank email. Where are you? The response came back 60 seconds later. It was an address for a high-end steakhouse downtown, about 4 blocks from my office building. I told the driver to change the destination. The restaurant was dark, smelling of aged beef, expensive bourbon, and old money. It was 2 in the afternoon, so the dining room was mostly empty, save for a few late business lunches. I spotted him immediately in a leather booth near the back. Caspian. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car, swirling a finger of amber liquid in a heavy crystal glass. He looked up as I approached and slid a leather-bound menu across the table. Sit down, Ren, he said. His voice was calm, completely devoid of the forced alpha male posturing he had tolerated in Sterling's rented boardroom. I slid into the booth opposite him. I didn't look at the menu. I put my phone on the table between us. Where did you get that audio? I asked. Caspian took a slow sip of his drink. I don't write $50,000 checks to men in cheap suits without doing my due diligence. When your father pitched me his mastermind group, I hired a private wealth investigator to look into him. Standard procedure. I wanted to make sure he actually had the capital he claimed. And you found out he was broke. I found out he was worse than broke. Caspian corrected, setting his glass down. He was a liability. But what my investigator also flagged was a series of meetings we took 3 weeks ago at a country club in the Palisades. The guest registry listed him as the guest of Holt Fairfax. He paused, letting the name hang in the air between us. Holt Fairfax is a serious man. Sterling Novak is a clown. There was no legitimate reason for them to be having lunch. So, my guy tipped a waiter $1,000 to leave a phone in the breadbasket on their table. You bugged my investor. I bugged the fraud, Caspian said flatly. Holt just happened to be sitting across from him. I was going to use the recording to quietly bury your father if he ever tried to use my name in his marketing. But then you invited me to that hotel boardroom. You blew him up yourself. It was impressive. Messy but impressive. Why send this to me now, I asked. You walked out of that room. You're suing him for fraud. You have nothing to do with me. Caspian leaned forward, resting his forearms on the polished mahogany table. Because I don't like being collateral damage in someone else's corporate takeover. When Sterling's financials collapsed yesterday, my lawyers started seizing his assets, and we found out he was expecting a massive payout from Vanguard Trust next week. 10% equity in your software company. I stared at him. The puzzle pieces were locking together so tightly it was hard to breathe. Holt promised him equity, I said softly. Exactly, Caspian nodded. Holt needed Sterling to trigger the fraud alert at Vanguard. That freezes your operating capital. It forces you into a liquidity crisis right before your launch. Then Finn's mother steps in with the cash, demands you sign over your voting rights, and the Fairfax family absorbs your proprietary code for pennies on the dollar. I looked down at the table. I had signed the paper an hour ago. The ink was barely dry. I had handed them everything. You're too late, I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. I signed it. Eleanor wired the money. Finn has the company. Caspian didn't look surprised. He just reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a silver money clip, and dropped a $100 bill on the table to cover his drink. A signature obtained under duress, predicated on manufactured corporate fraud. Isn't worth the paper it's printed on, Caspian said. But you can't fight Holt Fairfax with a sob story. You need leverage. And right now, the only person who holds the proof of conspiracy is your father. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh. My father will never testify against them. He's looking at federal prison for forging my signature. If he admits he conspired with Holt, he admits to the wire fraud. He doesn't have to testify, Caspian said. He just has to panic. My phone buzzed against the table. I glanced down at the screen. It was Paige. I picked it up. Paige, what is it? Ren. Her voice was frantic, breathless, like she was hiding in a supply closet. Where are you? I'm downtown. What's wrong? It's Finn, she whispered. He just walked in with 2 guys from IT. They aren't our guys. They're ex-contractors. He's having them change all the admin passwords on the primary servers. He told me you're taking an extended leave of absence. The cold reality of it washed over me. Finn wasn't even waiting for the wire transfer to clear. He was locking me out of my own house while I was still standing in the driveway. Paige, listen to me, I said, my voice dropping to a dead mechanical calm. Do not argue with him. Do not look suspicious. Just pack your bag and walk out. Tell him you have a migraine. But the launch. There is no launch, I said. Not for them. Walk out of the building. I'll call you in an hour. I hung up and looked across the table at Caspian. He was watching me with a quiet, calculated intensity. He's locking down the servers, I told him. Of course he is, Caspian said. He needs to establish possession before you figure out you've been played. Once he migrates the core code to a Fairfax-owned server, it takes 3 years of litigation to untangle it. How much time do I have? A few hours, Caspian said. Once they finalize the migration, you're locked out. You need a backdoor. Tell me you built a backdoor. I looked at him. I had spent 4 years writing every line of that logistics platform. I knew where every semicolon was buried. It's not a backdoor, I said. It's a kill switch. I built it in case we ever got hacked during beta testing. If I execute the command from my root admin account, the entire database encrypts itself. The user interface stays up, but the backend turns into complete gibberish. Nobody can read it. Nobody can use it. Can Finn bypass it? No, I said. He's the face. He handles the pitch decks and the VCs. He doesn't know how the architecture works, but I need my laptop to trigger it. And my laptop is sitting on my desk in the office, where Finn and his hired IT guys were currently standing guard. Caspian stood up and buttoned his suit jacket. Then we need to go get your laptop. You're coming with me? I asked, standing up to him. I have a vested interest in seeing Sterling Novak lose his 10% equity, Caspian said smoothly. And frankly, I despise Holt Fairfax. Let's take a walk. We left the steakhouse and walked the 4 blocks to my office building in complete silence. The afternoon sun was beating down on the concrete, but I felt freezing cold. Every step I took was a step further away from the life I thought I had built, and deeper into the wreckage my father had created. We took the elevator up to the 14th floor. The doors slid open to the glass-walled reception area of my company. The logo I had designed on the napkin 3 years ago was frosted onto the glass doors. I pushed the doors open and walked in. Caspian stayed one step behind me. Finn was standing in the center of the bullpen. He was pointing at a monitor while two guys in black polo shirts rapidly typed on keyboards. He looked up and the glass door shut. His face went completely white. Ren, Finn said, taking a step toward me. He tried to put on that soft, concerned partner voice, the one he used when I was stressed about server costs. What are you doing here? I thought you were going home to rest. I forgot my laptop, I said. I didn't break stride. I walked straight past him toward my glass-walled office. Finn moved quickly, stepping into my path and blocking the door. Ren, wait. Let's just take a breath. We need to transition the admin protocols so the launch goes smoothly. It's just a formality for the bank. I looked at him. Really looked at him. I looked at the tailored shirt, the expensive haircut, the complete lack of guilt in his eyes. He actually believed he was entitled to this. He believed he was doing me a favor by stealing my life's work. Move, Finn, I said. I can't let you do that, he said, his voice dropping lower, hardening. My mother wired the money. You signed the transfer. Technically, this is my office now. I can have security bring your things down in a box tomorrow. Caspian stepped out from behind me. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flex. He just looked at Finn the way you look at a piece of gum stuck to the bottom of your shoe. Mr. Fairfax, Caspian said. Finn blinked, clearly thrown by the presence of a man in a bespoke suit he didn't recognize. Who are you? My name is Caspian Drent. I represent the primary creditors currently liquidating Sterling Novak's estate, which means I am currently investigating the fraudulent transfer of $250,000 from Vanguard Trust. Finn swallowed hard. That's an internal company matter. Not anymore, Caspian lied flawlessly. Since your Uncle Holt was recorded conspiring with Mr. Novak to engineer the fraud, it is now a matter of federal conspiracy. The SEC is going to be very interested in how you use stolen funds to execute a hostile takeover of a tech startup. Finn's eyes darted between me and Caspian. The smooth, confident facade was cracking. He didn't know how much we knew, but he knew we had the name Holt. You don't know what you're talking about, Finn stammered. I have the audio file, Finn, I said quietly. I heard him selling me to Holt. I know you were in on it. Finn stared at me. For a second, just a split second, I saw the real him. The panic of a boy who was about to get caught cheating on a test. He stepped aside. I walked into my office, grabbed my laptop off the desk, and shoved it into my bag. I didn't look at the framed photos on the shelf. I didn't look at the whiteboard covered in my own handwriting. I just turned around and walked back out. Ren, Finn called out as I reached the elevator banks. If you try to blow up this launch, my mother will sue you into bankruptcy. You'll be paying legal fees for the rest of your life. I pressed the down button. The elevator chimed immediately. Tell Eleanor I said thank you for the bridge loan, I said. I stepped into the elevator with Caspian. The doors closed, cutting off Finn's face. We went down to the lobby and walked out into the street. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard, I thought my chest might crack open. There's a coffee shop across the street, Caspian said, pointing to a small independent cafe with outdoor seating. They have Wi-Fi. Do it there. We sat at a small metal table on the sidewalk. I pulled my laptop out, opened it, and tethered it to my phone's hotspot. I didn't trust the public network for this. I opened the terminal window. The black screen with green text reflected in my eyes. I typed in my root credentials. The system granted me access. Finn's IT guys hadn't found the backdoor portal yet. They were too busy securing the front gate. What does it do exactly? Caspian asked, sipping a black coffee he had just bought. It randomizes the cryptographic keys for the central database, I explained, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The front-end interface will look perfectly fine, but when a user tries to pull a logistics route or access a client manifest, the server will return a string of meaningless alphanumeric garbage. It renders the software functionally useless, and the code to fix it only exists in my head, I said. I typed the execution command. Sudo run was the joke version, but the reality was a string of specific directory targets I had written into a failsafe script 2 years ago. I took a breath. I thought about the 4 years of sleeping on the floor. I thought about the dinners I missed, the stress that had aged me, the pure, uncut panic of trying to keep this company afloat. And I thought about Sterling, sitting at a country club, trading it all away for a 10% cut. I hit enter. The terminal window flashed. Lines of code scrolled down the screen faster than the eye could read. Executing protocol Alpha 0. Encrypting database 1. Success encrypting database 2. Success scrambling directory tabs. Success connection terminated. I closed the laptop. The link shut with a sharp final click. It's done, I said. Caspian checked his heavy steel watch. Finn is going to realize what happened in about 10 minutes when his IT guys try to run a test query. He's going to call his uncle, and then Holt is going to call his lawyers. Let them call, I said, shoving the laptop back into my bag. They bought a hollow shell. They have the voting rights, but they don't have a product. The launch is dead. Not exactly, Caspian said softly. I stopped packing my bag and looked up at him. What do you mean? Caspian pulled his phone out of his pocket and slid it across the metal cafe table. The screen was open to a real estate listing. It was a massive, empty warehouse space in the industrial district, fully wired for enterprise-level server hosting. You don't have a company anymore, Ren, Caspian said, but you still have the code in your head, and you still have the client list. If you rebuild it, I will fund it properly this time. No family money, no bridge loans. Clean capital, I share the warehouse listing. It was exactly what I had wanted for the expansion. Why? I asked. You don't know anything about logistics software. Because Holt Fairfax stole my money too, in a roundabout way, Caspian said, his eyes hard and flat. He thought he could use a cheap grifter like your father to manipulate the board, and he assumed I was too stupid to notice I was standing in the blast radius. I want to watch Holt explain to his investors why he spent $250,000 on a piece of software that doesn't work, and I want you to launch a competing platform 3 days later and take every single one of his clients. It was a revenge play, pure, unadulterated corporate spite. You want me to build a lifeboat and watch them drown, I said. I want you to drive the speedboat that runs the river, Caspian corrected gently. Do we have a deal? Before I could answer, my phone rang again. It wasn't Paige this time. It was an unrecognized number. I stared at it. It's probably Holt, I said. Or Eleanor. Answer it, Caspian said. Put it on speaker. Let's see how fast they panic. I slid my thumb across the screen into the speaker icon. I set the phone down on the metal table between us. Hello, I said. There was heavy, ragged breathing on the other end of the line. Traffic noise blared in the background. Friend, it wasn't Holt. It was Sterling. His voice didn't have the booming, theatrical resonance he used on stage. It was thin, reedy, and vibrating with genuine terror. Dad, I said. I hadn't called him that in years. Friend, you have to help me, Sterling gasped. He sounded like he was running. You have to tell them I didn't do it. You have to tell them it was a mistake. Tell who? I asked, exchanging a sharp look with Caspian. The police, Sterling sobbed. They're at my house, friend. 2 squad cars. They have a warrant for wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. But it wasn't supposed to happen like this. Holt promised me immunity. He promised me the tax board would go away. I felt a cold trickle of dread wash over the back of my neck. I didn't call the police, I said. I didn't report the fraud to Vanguard. I signed the company over to Vin. I know you didn't call them. Sterling yelled, his voice cracking. Holt called them. The coffee shop around me seemed to fade into static. What? I breathed. Holt called them, Sterling repeated frantically. He used the Vanguard report. He filed the federal complaint against me himself. He's throwing me to the wolves, friend. He's going to let me take the fall for the forgery so the Fairfax name stays clean. He told the feds I acted alone. You have to tell them I didn't. I stared at the phone. Holt hadn't just used my father to steal my company. He had used him, squeezed the equity out of him, and then immediately burned him to cover his tracks. Holt was tying up loose ends by having Sterling arrested for the forgery. Holt solidified the narrative that the Fairfaxes were the victims who swooped in to save the day, completely isolating Sterling as the lone criminal. Ren, please, Sterling begged. I could hear a siren wailing in the distance over the phone line. I'll go to federal prison. They're going to put me away for a decade. Tell them Holt told me to do it. Tell them about the meeting at the country club. I can't, I said, my voice completely hollow. Why not? He screamed. Because I don't have proof, Sterling, I said. I have an illegal wiretap made by a private investigator that no court will ever admit into evidence. You signed the forgery. You took the money. You did exactly what they asked you to do. Ren, the call disconnected. I sat back in my metal chair. The screen of my phone faded to black. Sterling was going through. Finn had my broken software. Eleanor had my signature. And Holt Fairfax currently sitting in a boardroom, believing he had just flawlessly executed the perfect corporate theft. Caspian slowly picked up his coffee cup and took a sip. He didn't look shocked. He looked like a man watching a chess match where someone just sacrificed a pawn. Holt is cleaning house, Caspian noted quietly. He's insulating himself. With your father in federal custody, nobody is going to believe a word he says about Holt orchestrating the deal. He's a disgraced, bankrupt life coach, facing a decade for wire fraud. He's my father, I said. The words slipped out before I could stop them. I hated Sterling. I had spent my life cleaning up his messes, enduring his narcissism, suffering his public humiliation. But hearing the sheer, unadulterated terror in his voice as the police pulled up to his house, it was a different kind of violence. Caspian tilted his head. Are you reconsidering your position? Do you want to save him? No, I said, my voice hardening. I looked Caspian dead in the eye. He dug that grave with a silver spoon Holt handed him. Let him lie in it. I pulled my laptop back out of my bag and set it on the table. I opened the lid. Are we building a new company or not? I asked. Caspian smiled. It was a cold, predatory expression. We need a name. Revenant, I said, without missing a beat. It means someone who returns from the dead. Caspian pulled a slim black checkbook from his suit pocket. He unscrewed a fountain pen and began to write. I'll secure the warehouse space this afternoon. We need to buy servers. We need to hire a dev team. How much to get a bare-bones beta version of the logistic architecture operational? 50,000 for the hardware, I said, doing the math in my head. Another 30 for exercise licensing. And I need Paige. The assistant? She's not an assistant, I corrected him. She's the only one besides me who knows the client manifest inside and out. If we want to poach Holt's account, we need her. Caspian ripped the check from the book and slid it across the table. It was made out to cash. $100,000. Get to work, Caspian said. I took the check. It felt heavy in my hand. It was the exact opposite of the paper Eleanor had forced me to sign. This wasn't extortion. This was ammunition. I spent the next 3 hours at that coffee shop, sketching out the new database architecture on napkins and drafting server migration protocols in my terminal. When my battery finally dipped to 5%, packed up and called Paige. She picked up on the first ring. Where are you? She asked. Her voice was hushed. I'm at a diner on 4th. Did you leave the office? No, Paige whispered. I couldn't. Ren, it's bad. The servers went down an hour ago. The IT guys have been screaming at each other. Finn is losing his mind. He threw a coffee mug against the glass wall of your office. He keeps trying to call you. Let it ring, he said. Are the clients noticing? Yes, Paige said, and I could hear the sheer panic in her voice. The early adopters had locked out of their dashboards. The routing API is returning garbage data. Finn tried to call Holt, but Holt's assistant said he was in a meeting. Then a lawyer from Vanguard showed up with a cease and desist regarding the frozen funds. It was cascading faster than I thought. Paige, listen to me very carefully, I said, leaning closer to the phone. I want you to go to your desk. I want you to open your personal email, and I want you to attach the mass client contact list. The raw CSV file, not the encrypted one. Send it to yourself. Then format your hard drive. Leave your keycard on the desk, and walk out of that building. There was silence on the line for a long moment. Are you asking me to steal company property? Paige asked. Her voice was trembling. I'm asking you to bring me the list I wrote, I said. Finn doesn't own this relationship. I do. If you walk out now, I will double your salary starting tomorrow. If you stay, you're going to spend the next 6 months answering subpoenas for the SEC, while Finn blames you for the server crash. Another long silence. Then, I heard the faint clicking of a mouse over the phone. The file is in my draft folder, Paige said softly. I'm wiping the drive now. I'll text you an address, I said. Meet me there in an hour. I hung up. I stood on the sidewalk, watching the afternoon traffic roll past. The adrenaline that had been keeping me upright since Eleanor's sunroom was starting to wear off, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion. But I couldn't stop. If I stopped moving, the reality of what had happened today would catch up to me, and it would crush me. I hailed another cab, and gave the driver the address of the warehouse Caspian had secured. It was located in a grim industrial part of the city, flanked by auto body shops and abandoned textile mills. The building itself was a massive brick structure with frosted windows and a heavy steel door. I paid the driver and stepped out onto the cracked pavement. As I walked toward the entrance, I noticed a sleek silver Mercedes parked illegally in the loading zone. It looked entirely out of place in this neighborhood. I frowned, slowing my pace. Caspian drove a black town car, not a silver coupe. Before I could reach the heavy steel door, it opened from the inside. A woman stepped out into the late afternoon sun. She was wearing a tailored beige trench coat. Her dark hair pulled back into a severe knot. She had a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was Eleanor Fairfax. She looked exactly as she had in her sunroom hours ago. Perfectly composed, untouchable, and radiating a quiet, suffocating authority. She looked at me, then looked up at the brick facade of the warehouse. A bit rustic for a tech startup, don't you think? Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the industrial noise of the street. My stomach plummeted. How did she know I was here? Caspian had sent me the listing barely 2 hours ago. We hadn't signed a lease. We hadn't registered a new LLC. What are you doing here, Eleanor? I asked, keeping my distance. She walked slowly down the short flight of concrete stairs, stopping when she was about 6 feet away from me. She didn't look angry. She looked mildly disappointed, like a teacher dealing with a slow student. Finn called me in a panic an hour ago, Eleanor said smoothly. He said the servers were experiencing a catastrophic failure. He said you had disappeared. He was quite upset. The servers are encrypted, I said, my voice flat. He can't fix them. Nobody can fix them. You bought a paperweight. Yes, I gathered as much, Eleanor said, adjusting the strap of her leather portfolio. It was a rather childish contingency plan, Wren. Destructive, petty, and entirely predictable given your pedigree. It protected my work from being stolen by your son. I shot back, the anger finally flaring hot in my chest. And your brother-in-law. Eleanor didn't blink at the mention of Holt. She just smiled. A thin, bloodless line. Holt is an aggressive man. He lacks finesse, Eleanor said dismissively, as if discussing someone's poor choice of necktie rather than a federal conspiracy. But I did not come here to discuss Holt's heavy-handed tactics. Nor did I come to discuss your father, who is currently being processed at the county courthouse. Then why are you standing in front of my warehouse? I asked. Eleanor opened her leather portfolio. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. It looked identical to the one I had signed in her sunroom. I came because Caspian Drent called me 20 minutes ago, Eleanor said. The air rushed out of my lungs. What? Caspian is a businessman, Wren, Eleanor said softly, watching my face fall. A very shrewd one. He saw an opportunity. He secured this lease. He gave you a check to keep you busy, and then he called me to negotiate. Negotiate what? I breathed. The decryption key? Eleanor said. She stepped forward and held out the piece of paper. Caspian realized that funding a rival startup from scratch is expensive and risky. It is much more profitable to hold the existing software hostage. He offered to sell me the decryption key, the one you are going to write down for me, in exchange for a full refund of his initial investment in your father, plus a 20% premium for his trouble, paid directly from Vanguard Trust. I stared at her, feeling a cold, paralyzing numbness spread through my veins. Caspian hadn't wanted a revenge startup. He hadn't cared about beating Holt Fairfax at his own game. He just wanted his money back, and he realized that I was the only asset left in the entire mess that still held any value. He had played me just as flawlessly as Holt had played Sterling. He bought my trust with a check and a warehouse, and then immediately brokered a backroom deal with the Fairfaxes. I'm not giving you the key, I whispered, stepping back. You will, Eleanor said, her voice dropping its polite veneer, becoming steel. Because if you do not, Caspian will void the check in your pocket. The lease on this building will be canceled, and I will personally hand the Vanguard Club fraud files to the district attorney, outlining exactly how you and your father conspired to extort $250,000 from my family. I didn't take that money, I said, my voice shaking. You know I didn't. It does not matter what I know, Eleanor said coldly. It matters what I can prove. Your signature is on the credit line. Your father is in custody. You executed a malicious code to destroy company property immediately after resigning. The narrative writes itself, Wren. You are a bitter, unstable woman who tried to burn the house down when she was caught stealing. She held out a silver pen. Write down the decryption protocol, Eleanor commanded, or I will destroy you, and I will destroy whatever is left of your father. I looked at the silver pen in her hand. It caught the late afternoon sun, gleaming like a little weapon. For my entire life, this was the exact moment where I would break. This was the moment I would swallow my pride, scramble to fix the unfixable, and sacrifice my own sanity to protect Sterling from the consequences of his actions. It was what he trained me to do. It was what Ben had relied on. It was the absolute foundation of Eleanor's threat. She assumed I was still that terrified 12-year-old girl sitting at a gas station, desperate to save the only family she had. I looked up from the pen and met Eleanor's eyes. They were cold, expectant, and entirely confident. No, I said. Eleanor's hand remained suspended in the air. Excuse me? I said no, Eleanor. I didn't reach for the pen. I just stood my ground on the cracked pavement. Hand the files to the district attorney. Please, do it today. I would love to sit in a deposition and watch Vanguard's legal team explain how they approved a $250,000 line of credit without verifying my ID. Eleanor's jaw tightened. Your signature is on the document. A forged signature, I corrected. Executed on a Tuesday when I was in Portland, pitching at a tech incubator. I have flight records, hotel receipts, Uber logs, and a room full of witnesses. I wasn't even in the state. The DA will take one look at that file, realize the timeline is impossible, and then they'll start asking why Holt bypassed standard underwriting to push a fraudulent loan through your family's home bank. I watched the micro-expressions on her face shift. The absolute certainty was cracking, replaced by the sudden, terrifying realization that I wasn't bluffing. She had played the corporate intimidation card, forgetting that I was a logistics engineer. I dealt in data. I lived in timelines. If you force an investigation, they will indict your father, Eleanor said, her voice dropping, losing its smooth cadence. He will go to federal prison. I know, I said. The words tasted metallic, but the moment I said them, the heavy, suffocating weight I had carried in my chest for 20 years simply vanished. He earned it. Eleanor stared at me. She had no contingency plan for a daughter who refused to be a human shield. I reached into the pocket of my coat and pulled out the check Caspian had written me. $100,000. The seed money for my revenge. I looked at it for a second, feeling the thick, expensive paper between my fingers. Then I tore it in half. I tore it again, letting the 4 pieces flutter down onto the dirty concrete by Eleanor's pristine leather shoes. Tell Caspian can keep his money, I said quietly. I don't need his warehouse. I don't need dirty capital. And I definitely don't need to play your family's games anymore. You are throwing away your entire life's work out of spite, Eleanor hissed. You have nothing. I have the client list, I said, allowing myself a small, genuinely relaxed smile. Paige wiped her hard drive and walked out of your son's office 20 minutes ago. Finn has an encrypted server he can't read, a beta test he can't launch, and a board of directors who are going to want to know why he destroyed a multi-million-dollar asset on his first day. I took a step back, breathing in the smell of exhaust and wet pavement. It smelled like freedom. Good luck untangling the code, Eleanor. Tell Finn to try turning it off and turning it back on again. I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned my back on her and walked away. I didn't run. I just walked down the industrial street, leaving her standing there with her silver pen and her useless leverage. My phone buzzed in my pocket twice. I didn't look at it. I pulled it out, held down the power button, and shut it off entirely. I met Paige 30 minutes later at a 24-hour diner 2 towns over. The place smelled like stale grease and industrial floor cleaner. The vinyl on the booth was cracked and repaired with duct tape. It was the exact opposite of Holt Fairfax's country club, and it was perfect. Paige was already sitting in the corner with a massive ceramic mug of black coffee in front of her. She looked exhausted, her hair messed, her eyes wide with lingering adrenaline. There was a silver flash drive sitting on the formative table next to the sugar packets. I slid into the booth across from her. Did you get it? I asked. Paige nodded slowly, tapping the flash drive with her index finger. The raw CSV file, every contact, every vendor, every early adopter, completely unencrypted. It took a shaky breath. Finn called my emergency contact number before I turned my phone off. He was screaming. The IT guys told him the mainframe is permanently corrupted. It is, I said. A waitress in a faded apron walked over and dropped a menu on the table, pouring me a cup of coffee without asking. I took a sip. It was bitter, burnt, and absolutely wonderful. So, Paige said, wrapping both hands around her mug. What do we do now? Caspian's money's gone. Your dad is in jail. Finn has the branding. Finn has a logo, I corrected her. We have the relationships, and we know the architecture. I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. I set it on the table between the salt shaker and the ketchup bottle. I opened the lid. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the dark corner of the diner. I didn't open a terminal window. I didn't open a recovered file. I opened a blank, fresh document. It was terrifying. It was completely empty. It was the hardest thing in the world to look at, and it was entirely mine. I looked across the table at Paige. We start writing.